Good evening. When was the last time that you've thought about time? Maybe a deadline is approaching, or you're glad a difficult meeting is behind you, or all you can think about is, do I have the time to complete this next project? These are some of the ways that we talk about time as physical space. So our representations of time are so connected to motion through physical space that recent experiences can change the way that we think about time. A study by Lera Boroditsky asked people at an airport who were either waiting for a traveler or had just traveled an ambiguous question about time. The question was this: next Wednesday's meeting has been moved forward 2 days. What day is the meeting now that it's been rescheduled? Okay, take a minute to think about how you would answer that. All right, raise your hand if you thought Friday. Okay, raise your hand if you thought Monday. Okay, good. All right, so it's about 50-50. So that's exactly what they found with the people who were waiting for the arrival of their loved one. They were equally likely to say Monday as they were to say Friday. But here's the curious additional piece. Those travelers who had just stepped off the plane after traveling this great distance through physical space were more likely to say Friday. So traveling through physical space put them in the mindset of traveling physically through time. And if you're traveling through time, then you're coming towards it. So Friday, the future, is ahead of you. All right, I'm going to ask you to participate one more time. I promise, just once more. So use your hand to point to where yesterday would be. Okay. Now use your hand to point to where tomorrow would be. All right. That was actually really cool looking. So most of the audience pointed behind them for yesterday and in front of them for tomorrow. So the past is behind us and the future is ahead of us. What are some other ways we talk about time? Well, we can say summer follows winter. Wait, that's still using physical motion to talk about time. See, time is an abstract concept that we can't directly pick up with our senses. So a moment in time can't be physically approaching us, but we still understand what it means when someone says the deadline is approaching. Okay, so why do we use physical motion to talk about time? Well, one prominent theory by George Lakoff suggests that we map abstract concepts like time or ideas or emotion to our everyday experience with our bodies. So, in other words, when we think about abstract concepts, we activate representations of those concepts that are grounded in our everyday experience with the world. These representations stem from first-person experience with sensory stimuli, like touch or motor movement. These tangible experiences are then mapped to abstract concepts to help us make sense of them. In the same way that we talk about time as physical motion. In English, one of the main ways we talk about time is as moving towards and away from ourselves. So, for example, I can say, I'm looking forward to the weekend. Now, in this phrase, you know that the weekend is in the future. Well, how do you know that it's in the future? Because it's in front of the speaker. We also say things like, I'm glad Monday is behind us. Now, here we know Monday is in the past. How do we know that it's in the past? Because it's behind the speaker. I can't even talk about time without waving my arms around, which just shows you how connected time is to physical motion. So it just shows how connected time is to physical motion. So not only do you think about time as physical motion, but you also show it through your gestures. This is really important because gestures give us a window into our thoughts. In children, gestures are important in the development of their language and their cognition. we see children's concepts first emerge in gesture, from first words to later narratives, explanations, even math concepts. In fact, not only do we see evidence of children's grasp of new ideas in their gesture, but it signals their readiness to learn. So in the same way, we use gesture when we talk about time. Now, although we talk about time as moving towards and away from our body, like my trip is coming up, or I'm glad the past is behind us, or it's two time points in relation to one another, like vacation follows exams. Gesture tells a different story. In a recent study by Daniel Casasanto, he found that English-speaking adults gesture most frequently about time from left to right across the body, when gesturing spontaneously. In other words, when they're not asked to gesture, unlike I just did with you guys. Specifically, they gesture with the past to the left and the future to the right. So this is similar to calendars and timelines, and more importantly, the reading and writing direction in English. So this is something that most adults have daily sensory motor experience with. Okay, so we know how adults gesture about time, but what about children? Especially children who don't know how to read or write. Well, there's two possibilities. The first one is that children have a lot of experience watching adults gesture about time. So when children begin to talk about time, they also mimic adults' hand movements and gesture from left to right across the body. Another possibility is that children gesture in a way that is congruent with their own experience with movement through space. So in my research, we set out to answer this question. And what we found was that young children who have a plethora of experience with their own bodies moving through space have an easier time understanding abstract concepts that are more closely tied to their bodies, like my trip to the zoo is coming up. They have a more difficult time with concepts that are further removed from the body, like our trip to the zoo follows lunch, which puts two time points in relation to one another. And they show this understanding in gesture. So again, we see this pattern of gesture in children's expressions of time. Young pre-literate children gesture more frequently in a way that's congruent to the way that their body moves through space, so towards and away from themselves. However, they don't consistently place the past behind them and the future ahead. It's not until they begin to understand metaphors for time that their gestures begin to take on this specific directionality. So in other words, once children begin to understand the trip to the zoo is coming up, they begin to consistently place the past behind them and the future ahead. However, that's not the end of the story. So once children gain experience with literacy, again their gestures change. And like adults, they begin to gesture with the past to the left and the future to the right. It's at this time that children begin to understand those metaphors that are further removed from their bodies, like the trip to the zoo is coming up. So again, we see the same pattern of gesture signaling oncoming changes in children's cognitive development in the domain of abstract concepts. Okay, so we map our physical experience to abstract concepts to help us make sense of the world. We hear evidence of this in speech, namely metaphors, and we see evidence of this in gesture. So children's gestures about abstract concepts like time predict their readiness to learn these concepts in speech. So think about the implications of that. If an educator is able to pinpoint exactly when a child is ready to learn a certain concept, they could tailor their instruction to that child's specific developmental level. Parents could introduce concepts to their children at the appropriate time to maximize their learning. We could even detect developmental delays in young children just by listening to their hands. Think about it. Without motion, time is a really hard concept to understand. By comparing it to our own movement through space, and by actually moving our bodies through gesture, we make it so easy a child can understand it. So this concept can be applied to children at all different developmental levels, setting the stage for children's thinking and learning. So next time you see a child gesture, stop, look, and listen to what their hands are saying. Thank you.